I stood on the porch for almost 10 seconds before knocking. I never used to knock. It was my house after all, but over time that unspoken permission had faded like the edge of a rug worn down by too many quiet retreats. I held a pot roast in one hand, wrapped in foil still warm. It was the kind Grant used to ask for every year on his birthday. Elise opened the door and paused just long enough to make it uncomfortable. She looked me up and down, then stepped aside, not warmly, not kindly, just out of the way. "Who let that old woman in?" she muttered as I passed. Not whispered, not joked, said. The words dropped like silverware on tile. And what stung most wasn't the insult, it was the silence that followed. Grant was in the kitchen slicing bread. He heard her. He looked up. We locked eyes. He blinked, then looked back down at the cutting board. Not even a flinch. I didn't say a word. Just walked to the counter and set the roast down. No one offered to take it. The kitchen smelled like butter and garlic and something store-bought. Elise's parents were already there sipping wine. The kids were on their tablets in the living room, half curled on the couch, like this was any other Saturday. "Dinner's almost ready." Elise chirped like nothing had happened. "We're just doing something simple tonight." I nodded. Simple. She plated steaks for her parents. Real ones. Thick cuts, seared just right. For me, she slid out a small tray from the fridge. A foil container. Leftovers. Maybe chicken. Maybe not. "We didn't know if you were coming," she said, already turning back to the stove. Grant poured wine for Elise's father. He didn't pour any for me. I found a chair folding not matching the set and sat down at the edge of the table. No one looked up. Elise's mother smiled politely, like I was someone from church she barely remembered. The conversation carried on without pause, without me. I tried to taste the food, but everything had gone flat. Even the coffee was cold. I watched my son laugh at something Elise said. I couldn't hear the joke. Maybe I didn't want to. After dinner, I gathered the plates before anyone asked. Habit. I ran the water hot and washed them slowly. My back ached. Elise had already taken her parents out to the deck. Grant followed. I dried my hands, took one last look at the dining room, and walked out the door without saying goodbye. The pot roast was still on the counter untouched. The next Saturday, I told myself I wouldn't go. But habit is a stubborn thing. So is hope. I baked cornbread that morning, the same recipe Grant used to beg for after school, when his feet barely touched the floor under the kitchen table. I let it cool, wrapped it in a dish towel, and sat with it on my lap for 20 minutes before getting in the car. When I knocked, no one came right away. I could hear voices and music inside the clinking of silverware. I knocked again. Finally, the door opened halfway. "Oh," Elise said, tilting her head. "We didn't know you were coming." I held up the towel-wrapped bread. "Just thought I'd bring something by." She didn't move from the doorway. "It's kind of tight tonight. My parents are here." I stayed still. The dish got heavier in my hands. Grant appeared behind her. "Hey, Mom." His tone wasn't warm or cold. It just was. Elise looked over her shoulder. "We're already seated." "I'll just drop this off," I said, quickly, brushing past her before she could offer another excuse. The hallway was quiet. The table was set. 3 plates, one for Grant, one for Elise, one for her father. Her mother already had a salad bowl in front of her. There wasn't a 4th. I stood at the edge of the kitchen for a second too long. Elise walked past me, grabbed a wine glass from the counter, and handed it to her dad. Grant said nothing. There wasn't enough room. Elise finally said, not looking at me, "We only have the 6-person set, and we already had to bring in a stool." Her parents chuckled, like that was charming. I placed the cornbread on the kitchen counter, unwrapping it carefully. No one commented. Elise set down a platter of lemon chicken and started serving. She passed it clockwise. I watched her mother take 2 pieces. Grant cleared his throat. Thanks for the bread, Mom. I nodded. Of course. No one offered me a glass. No one asked if I wanted to stay. There was a bar stool at the kitchen island, but it already held a stack of mail. I lingered by the sink until Elise looked up. We'll drop the towel off next time we come by. That was her way of closing the door. I walked out quietly again without saying goodbye. The streetlights had come on. I sat in the car for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. It wasn't the lack of a plate. It was the certainty that no one thought I needed one. The next morning, I woke early and checked the mailbox for a thank you note. Nothing. Just the property tax bill addressed to me as it had always been. The house was still mine. Every letter from the city reminded me. The tax notice came on Tuesday, folded neatly in its white envelope addressed to Iris Calloway, not Grant or Elise. I opened it at the kitchen table in my apartment, the one-bedroom unit I had moved into to give them space. It was a laugh, really. I gave them space. I gave them the roof. I gave them everything but a bill. They never asked if I still handled the property taxes. I doubt it crossed their minds. Grant used to watch me balance a checkbook when he was little, amazed that numbers could line up so cleanly. Somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing. The utilities stayed in my name, too. Gas, water, electric. I had automatic payments set up from my account, a decision I made years ago, back when the arrangement was supposed to be temporary. Just a few months, he'd said. Just until they got on their feet after the second baby. That baby is in middle school now. They stopped updating me. I stopped asking. But the money kept flowing as if silence counted as permission. I sat with the bill in front of me, calculating. 6 years of taxes, utilities, repairs. I remembered the HVAC repair from last fall, $4,100. Elise had mentioned the house was chilly, and the next day I made the call. They never said thank you, not once. Grant talked about our house every time we spoke. We're going to paint the cabinets this summer. We're thinking of redoing the landscaping out front. He never said your house. He hadn't in years. But he didn't know what the deed said. I pulled the original document from my filing cabinet that afternoon. It was still crisp, still signed, dated, notarized. My name was there in clear print. No transfer. No sale. No joint ownership. Just me. It's amazing how invisible you can feel while holding proof that you exist. I made coffee and sat with the deed in front of me. I ran my finger over the embossed seal. The weight of it was heavier than the bills, heavier than the silence. They could forget birthdays, forget chairs at dinner, forget gratitude. But they couldn't change this. That night, I pulled out a blank yellow notepad and wrote one line at the top. Plan for transfer. Private use only. I hadn't really looked at the walls in a long time. I was always focused on something else, the food I brought, the towels I folded, the way Grant avoided eye contact when Elise took over the conversation. But last Sunday, while I was waiting for Elise to hand me the Tupperware I'd apparently forgotten, last time I stood in the hallway near the stairs, that's when I saw it. A photo gallery stretched across the wall, matching black frames, white mats, the whole set up like something pulled from a magazine. Smiling faces in autumn sweaters, a beach trip, the kids in Halloween costumes, Grant in a suit beside Elise at her sister's wedding, Elise's parents holding the newborn in the hospital. Not one photo included me. Not one. There had been one once. A picture of me and Grant in the backyard the summer after his father died. I had my arm around him and a slice of watermelon in my other hand. He was still a boy then. That photo used to sit on the entry table. I noticed it was gone a while back, but thought maybe it had been moved, not replaced. I was wrong. I scanned every frame. Not even one of me holding Ethan as a baby. I used to babysit 3 days a week when Elise went back to work. I remembered singing to him on the porch, rocking him to sleep when nothing else worked. I was in the room for those moments, but not in the pictures. Elise passed by behind me and noticed where I was looking. "Oh," she said, as if she'd caught me snooping. "We went with a cleaner aesthetic this year. Just immediate family." She smiled like it was reasonable. Like I wasn't standing there with Grant's cheekbones and half his laugh. "Intentional minimalism," she added. I nodded slowly, though my chest felt tight. Grant came down the stairs with a set of towels under his arm. He didn't see the exchange. Or maybe he chose not to. I took the Tupperware when Elise handed it to me and walked back toward the door. The photo wall trailed behind me like a closing curtain. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that word intentional. The next day, I added a second page to my notepad, timeline and exit strategy. I knew better than to expect much. Still, when I pulled into their driveway on the 7th of April, part of me held on to the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone would say it. Even once, the house was already full when I arrived. Balloons on the mailbox, something in the oven, Elise's mother carrying in a gift bag. I stepped inside and was met with the smell of cinnamon and peanut butter. Odd, but familiar. "Perfect timing," Elise said, brushing past me with a tray of cupcakes. They were decorated with little paw prints. She caught my glance. "It's Scout's Gotcha Day. Can you believe it's been 4 years?" I smiled politely. The golden retriever was wagging his tail in the corner, wearing a party hat. Someone had made a paper banner that read, "We love you, Scout." I set down the banana bread I'd made. No one looked twice. Grant gave me a quick hug, half-hearted one arm. "Hey, Mom, there's soda in the fridge." No mention of the date. Not even a pause. Elise's parents were seated at the table already. The kids were decorating dog biscuits. Everyone had a party favor. I stood by the kitchen island, holding an unopened can of ginger ale, wondering how I'd become a guest in a home I once signed for. Dinner was buffet style. Chicken sliders, macaroni salad, cupcakes for dessert. I helped plate the food without being asked. Muscle memory. Scout got a candle in a beef-flavored treat. They sang to him, Elise leading the kids, giggling, Elise's mother clapping off beat. I watched them from the sink sponge in hand. No one noticed when I started doing the dishes. No one stopped me. Grant passed behind me at one point. "Mom, don't worry about that," he said absently, grabbing a handful of napkins from the drawer. I nodded and kept washing. I could have reminded them. Could have said, "You know, today's also my birthday." But what was the point? If it had to be mentioned by me, it didn't count. The candles flickered out on the cupcakes. The kids ran outside with Scout. Elise and her mother took photos for some social media post. Grant scrolled his phone in the corner chair. When I was done drying the last dish, I folded the towel neatly on the counter and stood there for a moment. No one turned. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my notepad again. Page 3. Title transfer window, 6 to 8 weeks. No family disclosure. Quiet listing. I arrived earlier than usual. I'd made a batch of apple muffins and figured I'd catch Ethan before he disappeared into whatever game had his attention these days. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in quietly. I used to knock, but lately it felt like no one heard it. The house was quiet at first, but I could hear voices coming from the back porch. The sliding glass door was open just an inch, and their conversation carried through with painful clarity. "She's slowing down," Elise said. Her voice was calm, as if she were discussing the weather. There was a pause, the sound of a glass being set down. "We've talked about this before," she continued. "We should consider long-term care options. Not right away, but we can't keep doing this halfway situation. It's not sustainable." "She's not living with us," Grant said flatly. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand still on the muffin tin. "I didn't say that," Elise replied. "But the bills, the unannounced visits, the expectations, it's all too much. The house still being in her name. It's messy, Grant. Legally, financially, it's messy." He didn't respond right away. "I know," he finally said. "I'll talk to her." There was another long pause. Then, "We should do it soon." before something happens and we're left scrambling. Something happened. That was how she phrased it. I stepped back quietly, careful not to let the floorboards creak. I placed the muffins on the counter, covered them with a towel, and left the house before anyone knew I was there. In the car, I stared through the windshield for several minutes. I tried to remember the last time Grant had asked how I was doing. Not about the house, not about the groceries, not about errands, but about me, my health, my life, my plans. I couldn't remember. It wasn't about aging. I wasn't fragile. I didn't need managing. What I needed, what I expected, was respect. I had traded years of work and savings and space for the promise of family. And now they were treating me like an overdue obligation. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened the notepad again and wrote, "Initiate realtor contact. Quiet inquiry only. Discretion required." The notepad had been in the bottom drawer of my file cabinet for years, still wrapped in its original plastic sleeve. I'd bought it during a back-to-school sale thinking I might use it to track recipes or grocery lists. But on that Wednesday morning, I unwrapped it with a different intention. At the top of the first page, in block letters, I wrote, "Home transfer, private action plan." Then I listed the pieces I already had in place. 1. Original deed, filed signed. 2. Title insurance policy, still active. 3. Mortgage, paid in full, 0 owed. 4. Utilities, under my name. 5. Tax records, up to date. I paused, took a sip of coffee, then flipped to the second page and began the next section. What they don't know. Underneath, I wrote in quick strokes, I never added Grant to the deed. I never filed a quitclaim. I never signed over control. I never promised them the house. They assumed, and I let them. That was on me. But assumption has a cost. And mine was about to be collected. I dug through my filing cabinet again and pulled out old correspondence. Letters from the city, utility bills, a few copies of checks I'd written over the years to plumbers, roofers, pest control. Every invoice with my name printed at the top. Their neglect made my paper trail cleaner. I laid everything out on the kitchen table, labeled folders, stapled receipts, highlighted key sections. No more ambiguity. No more room for misinterpretation. If they wanted to play this like a business deal, then I'd be the one writing the closing documents. It wasn't about anger. It was about clarity. They'd made their priorities known, and now I had to respond in kind, with precision. By lunch, I had filled 5 pages in the notepad. Each step had a date, a contact, an outcome. I added a line at the bottom, no verbal warnings, no emotional confrontations, no second chances. This wasn't going to be a scene. It was going to be a file. Something they'd receive by mail or maybe discover taped to the front door when the timing was right. I placed the notepad into a manila envelope and labeled it Transfer Packet, Do Not Discard. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the browser to search for local realtors. Quiet sale, discreet process, serious buyers only. We met at a small cafe 2 towns over. I chose it because it wasn't the kind of place Elise or Grant would ever step into. Too plain, too quiet, too far from anything they found useful. I got there early, ordered black coffee, and picked the corner table near the window. Arturo arrived 5 minutes late, but I didn't mind. He greeted me with that familiar professionalism that had never wavered, not even when I showed up in tears to draft my husband's will years ago. He didn't offer small talk, and I didn't ask for it. He opened his briefcase and slid a thin stack of papers across the table. "You're sure?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned each page slowly, scanning the words I already knew. Purchase agreement template, authorization for listing, contingency waivers, title reassignment protocol. I said, signing the first page. He nodded and reached for his pen. "We'll file it under your name only. Quiet listing, limited disclosures. I'll work directly with the agent to control the narrative." No family involved, I said. Understood. I signed the next 3 forms with steady hands. My coffee cooled beside me untouched. The pen made small, efficient sounds against the paper. Each stroke felt like reclaiming oxygen I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. He flipped to the last page and hesitated. You do realize once this is listed, they'll find out eventually. I'm counting on it. He studied me. You want to proceed without confrontation. There's nothing left to confront. He nodded again, this time with something closer to respect. Not pity, not surprise, just recognition. When all the forms were signed, he stacked them neatly and placed them back into his briefcase. I'll initiate the title verification tomorrow. Expect a call from the listing agent within the week. I don't want a sign in the yard, I said. There won't be one. He finished his coffee. I never touched mine. As we stood to leave, he placed his hand lightly on my shoulder. You've done this the right way. Quiet, but complete. I nodded, thanked him, and watched him disappear into the parking lot. I sat back down for a moment, letting the noise of clinking cups and distant conversations fill the silence. I opened my purse and took out the notepad. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote 2 more words. Initiated. Confirmed. I hadn't planned to stay long. I told myself it was just a drop-off, a few frozen casseroles, a bag of oranges, and 1 framed photo wrapped in brown paper. Ethan was sprawled on the couch when I arrived, legs hanging over the armrest, fingers flying across a controller. He barely looked up. Hi, Grandma, he mumbled without pause in his game. I smiled anyway. Hey, sweetheart. I placed the food in the fridge and then reached into my tote for the package. It was a picture of Grant at age 6, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding a paper crown Ethan had made in preschool. I had taken the photo myself, printed it, and kept it in a drawer for years. I thought you might want this, I said, holding it out to him. Ethan finally looked over, pausing the game. He tore the paper slowly, like he was unwrapping a pair of socks. Oh, cool, he said flatly. He looked at it for 2 seconds, then set it face down on the coffee table. I waited for a question, a smile, anything. Nothing came. Elise walked in from the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel. She glanced at the photo and then at me. We really don't need more clutter, Iris. I looked at her, then at the back of the frame resting there, like a misplaced item. It's not clutter, I said softly. It's family. She tilted her head. Well, we've been trying to keep the space clean. You know just what's essential. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to explain what a photo meant to someone who'd never needed to hold on to anything longer than a season. Ethan had already gone back to his game. I picked up the frame and set it gently on the entry table beside a decorative bowl filled with keys and receipts. Elise didn't stop me, but she didn't look happy either. I'll head out, I said. Okay, she said already. Halfway back down the hall. Outside, the air felt heavier than it should have. I sat in my car for a while, watching the house through the windshield. The photo might stay there for a day, maybe 2. Then it would disappear into a drawer, or the trash, or a donation box labeled MISC. Back at home, I pulled the notepad from the kitchen drawer. I flipped past the signed pages and began a new one. Personal items. Disperse or discard. Keep nothing they've already forgotten. The sign went up just after 6. I parked my car on the opposite side of the street, 2 houses down, out of view, but close enough to watch. The agent's truck rolled in quietly, headlights dim. He didn't knock. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't have to. He walked straight to the lawn, pulled a metal stake from the bed of his truck, and started hammering. It took 5 strikes. I counted them. The wood post went in next, then the swinging sign below it, white background, red lettering, for sale. Below that, a phone number. And beneath that, private listing, shown by appointment only. He straightened the sign and snapped a photo with his phone. Then he got back in his truck and drove off without ever looking at the house. I watched the sun rise over the roof I'd paid for. By 6:45, the street was waking up. A dog barked 3 houses down. A jogger passed. A car started in a nearby driveway. Still, the house remained silent. Until 7:12. The front door opened fast like it had been yanked. Elise stepped out in a robe, coffee cup in hand. She didn't see the sign at first. She was halfway to the mailbox when she stopped mid-stride. I saw her blink, then stare. She walked closer, reached out, touched the post, like maybe it wasn't real. Then she turned, scanned the street, and spotted my car. Her expression changed in an instant. I didn't move. She stormed back into the house. Less than a minute later, the door flew open again, this time with Grant behind her, barefoot shirt, half-buttoned face still swollen with sleep. They both stood on the lawn, staring at the sign like it had fallen from the sky. Elise was already on her phone. I knew the agent wouldn't answer. We'd agreed on that. Grant looked around the street again, slower this time. His eyes passed right over me. I rolled up the window and started the car. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. Elise pacing in the grass, waving her arms. Grant still frozen at the edge of the driveway, like the ground had opened beneath him. Back home, I opened the notepad and drew a single checkmark beside the line, "Public notification executed." No verbal contact required. By the time I got home, my phone had started to light up. First it was Elise, 2 missed calls back to back. Then Grant. Then Elise again. No messages at first, just the pressure of repeated rings, like they were hoping sheer insistence could undo what the sign had already made clear. I silenced the phone and placed it face down on the counter. It buzzed again 5 minutes later. This time she left a voicemail. I didn't want to listen, but I did. "Iris," she snapped, voice sharp, already mid-sentence. "You had no right to blindside us like this. We had a routine. We had stability. You've completely destroyed that. What kind of mother does this to her own family? You betrayed us." Betrayed. I listened to it twice. The second time, I heard something underneath her words. Fear, not sorrow, not regret. Fear. Another voicemail landed within seconds. Grant, this time. "Mom, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you can't just sell the house without telling us. You can't. This affects everyone. You should have said something. We could have worked something out." I deleted them both. A third came before I could even put the phone down. "You've embarrassed us," Elise hissed. "Do you know what people are going to say? My parents just saw the sign. They're asking questions. You're making a scene." There it was. That word again. Scene. The scene apparently was the truth written in bold letters on their front lawn. No yelling, no confrontation. Just a sign and silence. And somehow, that was louder than anything I'd said in years. I blocked both of their numbers, not out of spite, just clarity. They had made it clear what I was to them, a resource, a fixture, something useful until it wasn't. I made coffee and sat at the table with the notepad beside me. The apartment was quiet, no footsteps above or beside me. No one shouting from down the hallway. Just the slow drip of the machine and the weight of my name still printed on the deed until the final papers were filed. The mug was still warm when I opened the next folder and wrote, "Vacancy notice 30 days from listing date. File for formal delivery." He came on a Thursday. I knew it would happen eventually. It was around 7 in the evening, just as the sun dipped behind the apartment complex across the way. I had just poured a second cup of coffee still warm from the pot and sat down with my notepad open when the knock came hard, insistent, unmistakable. I didn't move. The knock came again, then a voice. "Mom, open the door." I closed the notepad. "I know you're in there. Your car's out front." Still, I said nothing. My apartment door didn't have a peephole, but I didn't need one. I could see his silhouette through the frosted glass, tall, stiff pacing. "I just want to talk," he said. "Please." It was the please that almost got me. It cracked halfway out of his throat like it had rust on it. He knocked again. "You're really not going to open the door? I'm your son." There it was. He said it like a password, like it should unlock something in me. "I brought my checkbook," he added. "We can work something out. I'm not saying we deserve the house," but he stopped himself. Maybe because even he couldn't finish that sentence with a straight face. "I'm not asking for everything. Just, let's sit down." I stayed seated, mug in hand, not drinking. His footsteps moved away, then returned. Another knock. "You're being unreasonable." He snapped the edge, returning. "You're hurting your own grandchildren." The switch came fast, it always did. This doesn't have to be ugly. It already was. It had been for years. But until now, I was the only one who'd had to swallow it. The silence stretched. Then came the sound of footsteps descending the stairs outside. Slower. Defeated, I waited until I could no longer hear his car, then stood and drew the chain across the door. He hadn't asked if I was okay. Hadn't mentioned my birthday. Hadn't brought anything but an open checkbook and a rehearsed tone. I went back to the table, crossed out possibility of discussion from my contingency notes, and wrote in bold, "No exceptions. No entry. No revisions." Then I turned the page and began preparing the final delivery notice. I had a half-hour window to go back in. The listing agent arranged it quietly one day while Elise and Grant were at work. The kids at school and the buyers wouldn't be touring until the next afternoon. He gave me the code to the lockbox. No fanfare. No conversation. Just a code. I parked down the street and walked the rest of the way, keys in hand, heart steady. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because I had finally stepped far enough away to see it clearly. Inside, it was silent. Not peaceful, just paused, like a room waiting to be reset after a party that went too long. I moved through the hallway without turning on the lights. I didn't want to disturb anything more than I had to. I wasn't there to reminisce. I was there to remove what still belonged to me and nothing else. The dining room still had my mother's china in the glass cabinet. Elise had repurposed the quilt I made for Grant's wedding as a throw on the couch. There were candles everywhere, now scented ones in jars with names like Cashmere Breeze and Clean Linen. My old wooden bookshelf had been painted white and filled with Instagram-worthy decor, fake plants, word signs, shallow bowls. I didn't touch any of it. Instead, I went to the upstairs closet mine once. In the back behind a box labeled Misk Holiday was the folder. Yellow, thick, every legal paper I ever filed. Copies of tax bills, a backup of the deed, a copy of the will I had since rewritten. I tucked it into my tote bag. I went to the bedroom and opened the jewelry drawer. It had been rifled through over the years, things moved and misplaced. But the one item I still cared about, a gold ring from my mother, was where I left it wrapped in a silk handkerchief. I slid it onto my finger and stared at my reflection for a moment. Same eyes, same hands, different spine. I didn't take the quilt. I didn't take the china. I didn't take the framed photo of Grant and me when he was 6 that used to sit beside his bed. It was gone now anyway. As I locked the front door behind me, I could feel the house watching me go. But it wasn't mine to mourn anymore. They'd claimed every square foot, as theirs called it their home, even as the papers said otherwise. Back in the car, I rested the folder on the passenger seat and turned the key. The envelope containing the final notice sat inside, sealed and addressed. I dropped it into the mailbox before I even turned onto the main road. I hadn't visited the storage unit in months. It was a small space on the far edge of town, tucked between a tire shop and a shuttered diner, the kind of place no one finds unless they're looking. I'd kept it mostly for overflow, a safety net for the things I couldn't bring myself to toss, but had no room for in the apartment. When I opened the roll-up door, the air was stale. Not musty, just still. Nothing had moved since I last packed the bins and boxes, and that was the point. I needed one space in my life that hadn't been rearranged by someone else's hands. I clicked on the overhead light and stood in the doorway for a moment. There were 6 boxes stacked neatly against the back wall. 3 were labeled in my handwriting kitchenware linens documents. The other 3 had been filled and taped by Elise and Grant when they'd insisted on helping me move out. They hadn't asked what I wanted to keep. They just handed me sealed cardboard and told me they'd taken care of it. I opened one. Inside mismatched frames, a chipped vase that once held anniversary flowers, a sweatshirt that wasn't mine, and a pair of shoes I hadn't worn since before the hip surgery. Junk. They're junk. I closed the box and pulled a black marker from my coat pocket. On the side, I wrote, "Donate. No return needed." The second box was more of the same. Candles, dusty Christmas mugs, old cords without matching devices. Elise had labeled it sentimental, but it was just clutter. Donate. I moved to the third. Baby toys. Ethan's old books. A bib with Grandma's boy printed in fading letters. I paused my hand, hovering over it. The fabric was stiff. It hadn't been touched in years. I placed it back gently and closed the box. Donate. There were no notes inside. No post-its that said, "Love you," no markers of shared memory. Just objects stuffed into corners and taped shut. Whatever history these things once held had long since expired. I pulled the 3 boxes marked Donate to the front of the unit. The facility had a collection pickup on Fridays. I'd already arranged it. The other 3 boxes, the ones I'd packed myself, I left where they were. They weren't valuable, not really, but they were mine. Before I shut the unit door, I turned off the light and took one last glance. No sentimentality, no regret. Just space and silence. That evening, I updated the folder with the sale's projected closing date. It was 2 weeks out. The buyers had already submitted their final paperwork. All that was left was for me to sign and walk away. I didn't write the letter out of anger. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was just clarity offered quietly and without apology. Ethan was 13 now, old enough to understand what a mortgage was. Old enough to hear whispers in the hallway and put things together for himself. Old enough to wonder why his father and mother were suddenly talking in low voices about moving money and lawyers. He'd stopped talking to me months ago beyond the casual greetings and thank yous his parents forced out of him. But I still remembered the boy who used to sit on my lap with a picture book and ask 100 questions before breakfast. He was still in there somewhere. I didn't need him to take sides. I just needed him to have the truth before someone else tried to bury it. I folded the photocopy of the deed carefully, then tucked it into a plain white envelope. No return address, just his name on the front in my neat handwriting. Inside, I added a short note. 3 lines handwritten, black ink. Ethan, one day you'll want to understand what happened. Start here, then ask your father who paid for your roof. Grandma. I didn't sign it with love. That wasn't the tone this needed. I sealed the envelope and mailed it from a different post office just in case Elise had started intercepting things. She would hate it. I knew that. She'd probably try to spin it, tear it up, or pretend it never arrived. But if Ethan saw it, if he held that page in his hand, even once, it would be enough. Even if he didn't believe it right away. Even if he never mentioned it. It would still sit there in the back of his mind waiting. People can ignore feelings. They can rewrite conversations, dismiss memories. But paper official dated, stamped, that's harder to erase. That night, I marked the final line in the folder as complete, family notified. Direct line only. No follow-up required. The sale would close in 12 days. The house once mine, and then claimed by everyone but me, would soon belong to someone who never asked for more than they paid for. I found out through a neighbor. Not mine, hers. Marilyn called me that morning, with a voice full of carefully measured concern. She still lived 3 houses down from the place I used to call home. I didn't want to intrude, she said, but Elise made a post. It's getting attention. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. I already knew it would be public. Elise never wasted an opportunity to look like a victim in front of strangers. I hung up and opened my laptop, more curious than upset. There it was. A long caption beneath a filtered photo of the house with a soft gray sky above it. The kind of picture someone takes when they're trying to look thoughtful. But all they want is pity. The words beneath it were bloated and sugary, each sentence dripping with forced heartbreak. Sometimes the people who raise you are the first to throw you away. We opened our doors. We built a life. And then, without warning, my husband's own mother sold the house we lived in behind our backs. No explanation, no care. Just a signature and a notice. We are heartbroken, betrayed, abandoned. Heartbroken, betrayed, abandoned. I read it twice. Once with disbelief, once with quiet calm. It had 13 likes. 2 were from accounts I didn't recognize. 1 from her sister, none from Grant. There were only a handful of comments. One friend said sending love. Another added a heart emoji. Most said nothing. I scrolled past the tags. Family first. Healing. Chakra moving forward. It wasn't grief she was selling. It was theater. And this time the seats were mostly empty. I clicked out of the page and sat back in my chair. She had thrown everything she could at the screen, hoping it would stir someone. But there's only so much sympathy you can wring from people who've already heard too many stories and never the other side. Later that day, I got an email from the closing agent. All signatures received. Funds confirmed. Transfer of ownership would finalize by the end of the week. I opened the manila folder on my desk. 1 page left unsigned mine. I reached for my pen. I didn't plan to drive by. I took the long way back from the grocery store, then turned down the old street out of habit. Maybe curiosity. Maybe to prove something to myself. The for sale sign was gone. In its place stood a row of flower pots, bright red tulips, freshly watered. The grass was cut lower than Grant ever bothered with, and the hedges were shaped into clean lines. Someone had painted the front door a deep green. The shutters, once chipped and peeling, were now a soft white. It didn't look like my house anymore. There were no toys scattered across the lawn, no damp towels hanging from porch chairs, no evidence of chaos. Just a new beginning with no trace of the mess that came before. A young woman stepped out onto the porch with a baby balanced on her hip. She looked tired in the way that new mothers always do, half alert, half dreaming. A man followed, holding a screwdriver and the lid to a light fixture. They weren't Grant and Elise. They didn't know me. They wouldn't ask who planted the oak tree in the backyard or who chose the tile in the kitchen. And I didn't need them to. As I slowed to a stop at the end of the block, the woman noticed me. She didn't glare or look suspicious. She just gave a polite nod, like neighbors do. The little girl standing beside her, maybe 5, maybe 6, lifted her hand and gave me a wave. I smiled and waved back. And then I kept driving. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. Just still. The house had always been a shell no matter how much I poured into it. What made it home once wasn't the walls or the color of the siding. It was the people I thought lived inside it with me. And when that faded, the structure didn't mean much anymore. Back at my apartment, I unpacked the groceries slowly. The new tenants would be settling in by now, finding the kitchen light switch by instinct, deciding where to put the coffee mugs. They'd fill the space with new voices, new laughter, new arguments. The old ones would fade with each coat of paint. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened the sliding door to the balcony, and stepped outside just as the wind began to shift. The mornings are mine now. No running water from a shower someone else turned on. No thud of doors closing. No clatter of dishes. I didn't dirty, just light. Quiet. And the sound of the coffee maker, slow and steady. I wake before my alarm most days, not because I have to, but because I want to. There's something honest about early light, how it touches everything gently, without demand. My slippers sit neatly by the bed, just where I left them. Nothing in this space shifts without me choosing it. I used to think silence was something to be filled. Now I let it stretch. I pad to the kitchen, measure out the grounds, and wait as the coffee brews. No one asks me to make toast. No one expects anything. The cup I pour is the one I want. Black strong, still steaming. I sit by the window and wrap both hands around the mug like it's an anchor. Across the parking lot, a man walks his dog leash slack between them. The world is still half asleep. I like it that way. The folders are gone from the table. The yellow notepad, too. I shredded the pages a week ago after the check cleared and the title transferred. The buyers never knew my name, and I preferred it that way. No more paperwork. No more explanation. I made a list of things I wouldn't do anymore. I wouldn't justify my choices. I wouldn't apologize for peace. I wouldn't shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort. I folded that list and tucked it into my desk drawer just in case I ever forgot. The apartment isn't big, but every inch of it is mine. The photos on the wall are the ones I chose to keep. Me and my sister on the pier. My mother in her garden. A snapshot of Grant at age 4 before Elise before distance. I left it in black and white. It's the only version of him I still recognize. No one calls me old woman here. No one forgets a chair for me. No one makes me earn a place I already paid for. I finish my coffee slowly, watching the sun stretch across the windowsill. Somewhere in the distance, a phone rings. Not mine. I stand, rinse the cup, and let the faucet run just a little longer than necessary. I had put it off longer than I should have. The sale was final. The check had cleared. The keys were in someone else's hands. The house was gone, but there was still one thing left to close. The will. I'd written the first version years ago, back when I still believed in unconditional family. Back when I thought fairness meant dividing things evenly and trusting everyone to handle it with grace. It had listed Grant as the sole beneficiary, my only child. I hadn't touched it since. But things change. People show you who they are, and sometimes love has to be revised. I sat at the desk by the window and pulled out the copy I'd marked up the week before. The lawyer had sent me the digital draft, but I printed it on paper I could touch. Paper that made it feel more permanent, more real. I read through every paragraph, every clause, every name. In the margin beside disposition of assets, I had scribbled one line, add exclusion clause. Now I wrote it in full. No inheritance, financial or material, shall pass to any individual who through word or action has treated the testator as a burden. This clause is final and non-negotiable. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Not out of hesitation, but recognition. I wasn't writing it out of spite. I was writing it to reclaim something, to put into writing what I had already felt lived, endured. I signed at the bottom. The pen didn't shake. The ink dried quickly. No addendum. No attached letter. No apology. I placed the signed copy into a clean manila envelope and sealed it. I'd drop it off at Arturo's office the next morning. He wouldn't ask questions, he never did, but I knew he'd understand. There was something sacred about paperwork when it was handled with dignity. It didn't scream. It didn't demand. It just spoke clearly and finally. When I stood from the desk, the apartment felt lighter somehow. The air a little clearer. I made a second cup of coffee and watched the steam curl up toward the ceiling. There was nothing left to edit. Nothing left to explain. Outside, the sun had begun to drop low behind the trees, casting long shadows over the balcony. I stood there, sipping slowly as the day began to fold into itself. It was the first warm afternoon after a string of gray days, and I found myself walking without any real destination. My legs followed the rhythm of habit, winding past storefronts, over sidewalks, down familiar streets. Before I knew it, I was turning the corner that led to the old neighborhood. I paused at the end of the block just long enough to consider turning back, but I didn't. I kept walking, slow and steady heels clicking on the pavement like punctuation. The house came into view, new siding, now a different shade of beige than the one I had chosen. A modern porch swing hung where the old bench used to be. A bird feeder dangled from the oak tree I planted the year Grant turned 10. There were toys in the yard again, bright plastic ones that hadn't faded in the sun yet. A child's voice floated out through the open window, followed by laughter. It didn't sting. Not anymore. As I passed, a little girl sat cross-legged on the porch, coloring on a clipboard. She looked up when I came near and tilted her head. "Did you used to live here?" she asked. I stopped for just a second, took in the shape of the house from where I stood. "I built it," I said. Her eyes widened a little, not from understanding, but from the certainty in my voice. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. I kept walking. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Whatever was still inside those walls belonged to someone else now. But the foundation, that was mine. Every inch poured, every nail chosen, every corner painted with care. I built that house not just with money, but with memory, with meals cooked and arguments resolved, and nights I stayed up pacing the hall when Grant had a fever. That house wouldn't exist without me. They forgot that. Elise erased it. Grant ignored it. But the deed had always known. And now so did the silence that followed me. By the time I reached my apartment building, the sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows across the lot. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. My keys didn't fumble. Inside, I brewed one last cup of coffee and sat near the window notebook closed folder filed away. They had called me that old woman, but I had another name for myself. I had always been the builder. They just hadn't recognized the blueprint.